Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a really great guest on today. She's an interdisciplinary artist, inventor, co-founder, executive, design leader, DJ, dancer, designer, and aspiring writer with a background in design, engineering, and interdisciplinary mischief. Decades of experience shipping products and experiences, including work on multiple operating systems and inventions that have now become ubiquitous and everyday. Please join me in welcoming Maylee Khoe. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Are you ready for 20 questions?
Let's go.
Great. Question one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
So this is a fun one, always. I actually have a poem I've written that says, asking me what I do is like asking me where I'm from, and it sort of sends me into a small existential crisis. Um, I'm not going to bother having the crisis right now, but I'm going to tell you sort of two separate things. One of them, which is that what do I do to sustain myself as a living, quote unquote, professionally, whatever that means. I'm not even sure whether or not that word applies here, and then I'm going to tell you all of the other stuff. So, my day job right now is as an executive in design, and I would say my field is primarily design, although my background is in engineering. I did study electrical engineering and computer science and engineering for a bachelor's and master's degree, and then went into design, and I've spent about a quarter of a century in the design profession, as well as in design leadership. So that's I mean, you covered a lot of it in the bio as well. My work as a technologist and inventor. Outside of that, I am also a musician. I have the fun news that my very first 45 is going into production. Song that I co-wrote and played with a bunch of my collaborators in a band that we co-founded called Neblinas del Pacifico. So that's another thing that I do. I also dance a lot, and I'm getting an MFA in creative writing at San Francisco State University. I'm probably forgetting something, but I think that's enough for now.
Sounds great. Just a note for the audience, if you guys are interested in other 2025 episodes, please check out the episode with Kareem Rashid. Question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
So there's a saying that fish can't see water, and it's sort of how, like, if you're swimming in a pond, as a fish, you're not necessarily like aware that you're in a pond or that you're in water at all. I've never had the luxury of doing that. I feel like I've always been not only having to straddle and hop between different ponds, I've also had to be out of the pond, probably in the muck below it, and in all sorts of places. And so, to make that a little bit more concrete, I've never really been able to fit in a box or um, like whether it be by choice or by discipline. An example of that is like I've immigrated twice. I'm a multi hyphenate, both like identity wise, culturally, all the various ways I identify. I'm queer. I am neuroatypical. You know, Even in my day job, would sometimes work a little bit doing engineering stuff, doing design stuff, doing prototyping stuff. Um, and sometimes like making independent posters for music gigs that I'd made as a DJ or as a producer of nightlife. Those kinds of design techniques wind up applying in my day job. So I'm always pulling from many different sources um, and seeing connections across all of them. So I'm always living in multiple worlds and I'm seeing up and down different levels of abstraction. So, as a musician, I can look at maybe the subject, the effect of a pause, um, or the effect of like minute details, artistic choices that are happening. But I can also do that as a designer, and I can also do that as somebody who potentially looks at like world orders and geopolitical history and how all of our lives are tied up in that. So, all the way from like white space to geopolitics, world orders, looking over several thousands of years of history. I think growing up, um, being somebody of like Asian diasporic ancestry means that we learned about time orders in multiple thousands of years. Um, and oftentimes my day to day is like, we're running in matters of minutes or seconds at times. So, um, not second so much, but I think it's sort of the opposite of linear thinking. Uh, and that's probably what makes me the weirdest. Did that make sense?
It does, yeah. It's
Okay, great.
great. So question three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
So I wound up in design because, well, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be an artist. I would just draw incessantly. I would write incessantly, just constant like creative generation. Um, and then, I was good at math. And when I was in high school, they were like, "Oh, you should go into engineering. There's not many you could do engineering, so especially because your math and your sciences are great." So I was like, okay. Um, and all of my, English language and arts teachers were like, no, stay in the arts. But like, was like, okay, well, I'm going to go do this hard thing. And then one day while I was in undergrad, I was playing around in Photoshop. And every time I would play around with it, hours would go by and I wouldn't notice that hours had gone by. I'd like swing right into hyperfocus, which was not a term at the time. Um, and because I didn't notice time going by when I did the tasks that I was doing in Photoshop, I thought maybe I should consider doing this as a living because time is just disappearing and you're really enjoying this. Um, so then it took me a moment to be able to actually get into full-time design because I hadn't studied it full time. I'd studied engineering full time, which later wound up being an advantage. So that's how I landed like in the day job, straddling, being a technologist, being a designer, being both. Um, all the other stuff, music, dance, writing, all the sort of experimental cross genre stuff, all of that is like I wind up doing that because I'm driven from a place that I can't really name. Like I just kind of have to. I think with dance, it's always been a matter of survival. I dance because I have to. If I don't dance, I'm not me. That's how like foundational I think that is to my being. And the rest of it, like drawing and writing and music and DJing, I think also just comes from this like because I can't not. If I could be like a happy being without doing all those things that just like does a lot less in life, I mean, maybe that would be great, but I don't know how to be that way.
Great. So some people struggle with number four, and the question is, what does your future look like?
Yeah, I think it's because it sounds so definitive, and people are like, well, I can't read the future. So I'm going to put the definitive part aside and just answer, like, maybe what could it look like? Um, I would love to be able to have a future in which I'm continuing to push forward what's possible in multiple disciplines, potentially crossing them. Um, Ideally, also, so creating, mentoring, being part of the cultural fabric of wherever I live. Um, and yeah, I think those are like probably the things that I would love to have happen. I've considered being a creative coach. I have not done that yet, but that is one possible future that I might pursue alongside my own artistic pursuits, as well as continuing to mentor and hopefully invent fun new things.
Cool. Five we say is unique to the show. The question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
I thought this was interesting when I was looking at the list you sent me. Especially as I mentioned earlier, I've immigrated twice, and my parents, I think, immigrated three times. And so the notion of place is always, um, it's always somewhere in what I'm doing, especially when it comes to my personal creativity. Um, a lot of the times when I write, my classmates will talk about world building. Something I really love doing in what I write is like really creating a sense of place. Um, my music is very tied as well to location in that the music we play with Neblinas del Pacífico is from the west coast of Colombia, and that's a very specific region that's gone through particular history, and all the instruments are made from natural elements that are found only in that region. The music is descended from people who were enslaved and brought over to that coast because it's very rich in minerals, who escaped, and we now work with them. All of the at least half of what we earn, we work with people on mutual aid, on well, on just funding mutual aid in that region. So that's also like a very place specific thing to do. And at the same time, we're adapting the music to be where we are, which is, for example, the Mission in San Francisco. And the song that's being pressed into a 45 at the moment is actually a song about the neighborhood,
Mm.
and some of the changes and populations and challenges that we have in a neighborhood that has its own deep cultural roots and is sort of undergoing change as the demographics and economic realities of the city have shifted over time. Yeah, and then in addition to that, I think being somebody who's like hyphenated, like northern hemisphere and hyphenated middle and southern hemisphere, means that I'm always straddling multiple locations. And sometimes in my life I've been doing it without seeing it, without being conscious of where it originates from. Like I grew up eating with a fork and a spoon, which is common in Indonesian and Filipino cultures. But I didn't know that. I didn't know where it was from. I just thought it was Dutch. And so when I went to school in the US and went into the dining hall and couldn't find the sort of spoons that I'd grown up eating with, which is just actually a regular like dining spoon, but they only had teaspoons and soup spoons in this dining hall. All of a sudden, I was like, wait a second, there's something different about me. Why can't I just eat the way that I'm used to eating? Um, and that's because I grew up in this immigrant family, had come from this particular place, and this kind of gets back to the like what is different about me. Like I can't even like pick up my eating utensils without being like, oh, geopolitics. So yeah, place comes into kind of everything I do. Um, and I think a lot about indigeneity and what it would mean if I had come from a population that had lived in the same place for tens of thousands of years and really knew, what the river was going to do 2 weeks from now because we've been there forever. Um, but yeah, I have no idea what that feels like.
Great. So you're starting from the beginning. What advice do you give your former younger self?
I think, wow, this was a tough one for me. I think there's stuff we can say like, don't sweat the small stuff. Like I have no idea how many decades of life you've lived, Thomas, but I feel like with every passing decade, there's like you sweat the little things less, and don't you stop. For me, growing up, like people pleasing for survival and being like, oh, you don't need to do that anymore earlier. But actually, I feel like if I could go back in time, there are all these terms that we use now and all these things we know about people now that we didn't know back then. Like I think if I'd understood um the neurodivergence of my father, I would have been able to cope better with the household. And if I'd understood that about myself, so many of the words that we understand now in 2025, like they weren't around when I was starting out, when I was younger. And if I'd had those words to understand like my own brain and my own queerness and all of these things that just like didn't exist back then, um, I kind of just wish I could have gone back in time and been like, hey, like here's all these things, like this is you're not just like weird and crazy. Like there's there's ways of coping with these differences, and I would have loved to have known that earlier in life.
Great. So seven, what's a day in your life like?
So this one is fun. It depends a little bit on a weekday or a weekend. With Saturdays and Sundays being totally different. I would say my focus right now, because I'm currently serving as a design executive um, at Handshake, a lot of my focus is making sure that things are sustainable for me physically while making sure that everything is like afloat and humming along and like um, getting accomplished to what needs to get done. Um, of what the job demands. So, you know, I'm getting up in the morning. The first thing I try and do is go outside, um, and do some stretching. I think maintaining some flexibility in breathing as you get older is really important. And they do say for circadian rhythm type stuff, the sooner you can get daylight on your skin after waking up in the morning, the better. So I just literally get up and walk out onto the deck. Um, and then there's just morning routine stuff. The daytime is like very intense. A lot of the times it's like I'm either trying to get something done by sitting at a computer typing, or I'm trying to get something done by talking to people around computers and typing. We can get into more detail about that if we want, but um, and then when that wraps up, I usually go to a dance studio and I'm in there for probably anywhere between an hour and 15 minutes or like 2.5 hours. And then after that, it just depends on how much time and energy I have to do anything else before I get ready for bed and then do the whole thing again.
Mhm.
Weekends are a lot more flexible and it just depends. Like, do I have a gig? Do I have a performance? Sometimes on a weeknight, I might also have a performance. And so, then there's prep time, there might be rehearsals. Um, I'm trying to think, yeah, just like life things.
Mhm.
Things that you have to do to keep things afloat, like groceries and laundry, and then there's other stuff that's like, oh, like I had a reading at the Phoenix Hotel a little while back, or um, yeah, the rest of it I like to keep it a little blank and a little unpredictable because I think that's par for the course when you work in lots of different media. You never know. You might have a show, you might have rehearsal for a show, you might just need to be at home drawing, or like, yesterday was San Francisco Zine Fest and it was awesome, so I went to that. Yeah.
Great. 8 is about lifelong learning. It's a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. Lifelong learning being a popular topic. I feel like, in our day and age, you sort of have a choice. You can either decide that knowledge was a fixed thing and you learned all you can learn before a certain age and then be like, and that's the end. Or like recognizing that information moves forward and we're not done yet and figuring out what's happening in the world. Presumably you can keep learning. Um, in my case, my sources of I've decided I would like to grow old in a way that's dynamic. Like I find it really fun and also part of the job as a designer to keep up with what is happening. Like what are people looking at? What are they reading? Where is culture moving? All of that type of stuff is not just like important for a line of work, but it's way more fun because it's new and my brain loves that sort of thing. Um, there's a couple different routes for it for me. I think because of the nature of what I do, um, I'm around all kinds of different people. Like I'm not around only one kind of person. And so a lot of the information I wind up getting a hold of, frankly, comes from living and existing and mixing with like totally different cultural pools. Um, like an example of a place where I would come across a lot of information is like the Zine Fest yesterday. Tons of people, all kinds of things, tons of nerds. Everybody's all into their different area. And you could probably stop at any booth and wind up rabbit holing on something fascinating with anybody in there. Um, Same thing with like, if I'm in a dance studio or I'm at a rehearsal or I like just talking to people around the place, like it's up to date can mean very different things, right? Like it's like up to date within our discipline, but there's also up to date with what's happening in the neighborhood. And if you want to know what's going on in the neighborhood, talk to your local barista because they've probably seen everything come through there. And I count that as learning. Obviously the internet is a huge source. The internet does not thankfully contain everything. So I also consider like IRL learning important, but I do love a good rabbit hole on the internet. Um, as I said earlier, like working in culture also means like keeping an eye to the ground, keeping an ear to the ground and an eye around the place to see what's going on in the world, not only here but abroad. And then to take it like seriously into like lifelong learning, in the spring of 2021, I decided I wanted to do an MFA in creative writing. I've always wanted to do an MFA. I thought I would want to do it in the visual arts. But when I realized that doing an MFA in the visual arts means like a lot of materials and a lot of objects, and I would like to stay lightweight and low cost. I was like, how about we just start with writing? I'd always thought I would want to be a writer later on in life, like probably fourth quarter of life. And then I realized, why not start sooner? So that's another thing that I've done is literally enrolled for a second master's.
Great. So we're approaching halfway here. Tools. Do you use both digital and analog tools?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We love digital, we love analog. I usually have a notebook. I usually actually have more than one notebook. Um, and I also use an iPad. One of my side projects is a little shared whiteboard that we made in 2017, and that works really well with Apple Pencil. So I'll use that on the iPad. That's for Scribble Together. But also, I also use Procreate um, sometimes for comics making, which I'm just starting to delve into. And then, yeah, I mean, we can't not use a laptop. So,
Great. Halfway number 10. How do you deal with work-life or life-work balance?
um, I mean, I guess probably the easiest way to look into that was kind of the other question you asked, like the day a day in the life. I wouldn't say I think there's multiple oscillations. I kind of think of them as I think of like work life like as an oscillation, not a static thing. So throughout the day, there's going to be moments that are more work and moments that are more lifey, whatever that means. Sometimes for me, they blur. And then there's also like periods of time over your life. Um, when I quit full-time work in 2019, I was an executive consultant for a while, did some contracting, did speaking events, ran workshops, and did that sort of thing. And that allowed me to have a little bit more flexibility. Then I spent a bunch of time focused on the MFA and doing a little bit of consulting. Now I'm back in work full time. So I'm also, I currently have the ability to do a little bit of adjusting over time. Um, I'd say day to day, I do not, or like week over week, I do not skimp on the dance studio. Um, I think I have to do it at least 3 times a week. And I just don't question that. So that's just happening. That's not a thing that I allow myself to not do. And it's an incredible way to clear my mind. So,
Great.
yeah.
So 11. If you weren't doing what you do now, what may you be doing?
I think that one is very similar to the future vision one. Like, if I weren't doing what I do now, I would probably be on my way to that vision, like a little bit more closely. So, I would be working on, and I think there's a question that will get to this a little bit more later. I'd be working on a bunch of my own creative projects,
Mhm.
probably collaborating with a bunch of Bay Area folk and being a little bit more involved in some of the art scenes here, applying for residencies, maybe doing some of them, hopefully, um, and potentially continuing to consult, um, both as a creative coach and maybe as an executive, depending on what's needed from me at the time. And of course, I'd spend even more time in the dance studio.
Awesome. So what would you not like to do with your career?
Would I not like to do? I don't like doing the same thing over and over again. So I think that's the main thing I'd say about that. I usually need something new in order to feel like really, um, yeah, really drawn forward, really stimulated. Um, Maybe another non-goal, to speak it out loud, is to work on things that just have to be like mediocre. I don't want to work on something that's like that's creating bad experiences for people. I think that per one of your earlier questions, a lot of what drives me in design is I really love it when I can create an experience for people um, that they enjoy using and get value out of. And it's really hard when you're in situations that don't allow you to do that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Great. 13. Do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Yeah, there's a saying in Spanish that says, Nadie te quite lo bailado, which means nobody can take away what you've danced. And what it's referring to is that, you are the maker of your life. Your life is comprised of all the experiences that you put into it, and nobody can take those away from you.
Mm.
That resonates pretty deeply with me. I love living my weird life in my own weird ways and having it be the life that only I could live. I think that if you are trying to live a life that anyone could live that's like, formulaic or checking off a bunch of boxes that you feel like you need to check off, like great for people if that works for them. I don't think that works for me, which is why that saying really resonates for me.
Mm. How about a
Yeah.
least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Um, I think that there's a bunch of sort of like positivity drivel that floats around on the internet. I really liked this question from you, Thomas, because I feel like it's like has the potential to be a little spicy, and we do love a little spice. People say things like, do whatever makes you happy. And I think it's kind of facile to say that. Like, if we all just did whatever made us happy, like within the constraints of like a lot of what people have to do in order to just like pay their bills, make rent, and sometimes do things that are kind of hard in life, like just feels a little out of touch. Like it feels like it makes it too simple.
Mm.
Um, so that's one. I was debating between that and another one that says like don't go to sleep angry or whatever. And I actually think any saying that's like don't go to sleep and then blank is just like incorrect, because the last thing you want to do when you're like tired and you should actually be sleeping is trying to solve yourself or like solve something or self-flagellate because you're having some inconvenient like negative emotion. Like actually probably what you should absolutely do is go to sleep.
Mhm.
That's my hot take.
Okay. You're choosing one word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
Um, I think I pick multifaceted.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What keeps you up at night?
Um, I'm gonna be literal about this rather than sort of like, oh, I like thinking about, like frankly, what keeps you up at night oftentimes is just trying to squeeze one more thing in. Like I'm trying to get one other thing done. It can be a fun thing, it could be an administrative thing. I'm one of those people who like the second I like lie down and I'm like, oh, I'll be like, shit, there's this other thing that I needed to do, or I'm having one more thought, or now this is the moment that like my brain decided inspiration has hit me. Or maybe I could just like throw some laundry, like that's what keeps me up at night. I keep me up at night. My brain seems to think that the day has like 25 hours in it. She's pretty convinced that, 24 ain't it, and we're working on that one.
What about a dream you're chasing?
I'm working on a couple of books, and I would love for them to be loved and published, but that's also not what I'm letting drive me creatively.
Mhm.
So, I just I want to make things that resonate with people and connect with people. I published an essay in the spring of 2020 on the internet about mortality. And after I published it, I was reached out to by so many people, and it just deepened my connection to a bunch of people in unexpected ways.
Mhm.
And I think I'd always thought of pursuing my own art as kind of a selfish act. I don't know what that block was about, but I think in writing that essay, that's when I realized that if I spent time um, understanding and yeah, spent time living in and making sense of and putting words to some of the things that I experience that actually helps other people as
Mm.
well with what they're experiencing. And that was a really profound realization. Um, so yeah, I would like more of that. Um, a dream I'm not chasing, but is also a dream, is I got paid to interview a musician live on stage at the first config, and I would love to do that again. I just
Mm.
like love interviewing creative people, which is what you're doing. So congrats, living the dream, Thomas.
Okay, 18. What inspires you?
I think I'm inspired by other people's creativity and their resilience. And I mean this like by all kinds of people, not just like pre-selected, already famous in the world or in the mainstream people. I love looking out for what's fresh. And so some of the places where I feel like I draw the most inspiration is like flipping through records at the record store. Especially if it's a used record store and there's all different eras in there. The Zine Fest, San Francisco Art Book Fair, Printed Matter New York. Um, but also, going back to school and going to SF State where it's like 30 to 40% first gen and college students, and being in the comics making program, we'd be sitting at the benches, and these students, like, just their focus, their notebooks were like full of drawings, and they would just draw at every chance that they got. And I was just so inspired to see these like undergrads, frankly, and how committed they were to their creative practice. Um, so I think that inspires me. And then, of course, there's specific artists that I love, ones that get people to consider their worldview, make people realize some of the underlying assumptions that they've had, or make people see the water as fish, per your first question,
Mm.
or second question. Those are the kinds of creative and artistic works that especially resonate with me.
Mm. Great. And last couple here. Number 19, any advice you'd like to share?
Um, I think the easiest advice that I can give people is to remember to breathe, because it's easy to forget, especially if you grew up in a way um, that um, you were kind of in survival mode a lot. So that's probably the easier one. But then, like, maybe the harder advice that I would give people is to find questions to fall in love with, not just answers. And the reason I want to bring up that second one is because I think we're living in an age of people wanting the answers to things all the time. But I think we're also living in an age where we need to be asking ourselves some pretty big questions, and we're probably going to be on the journey of asking those questions, and obviously seeking the answers. But the questions that we're asking ourselves also really, really matter, because those are the things that frame what comes next. So yeah, I would encourage people to examine that. Like, what kinds of questions are you asking?
Great. And finally, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you and what's our call to action?
Um, Good question on this one. I have, I'm still formatting a newer newsletter. I used to be on Tiny Letter, and then that got bought. So um, I have a Substack that I'm not using, but you can sign up for it, and then I will find a way to find you. I also have accounts on most of the social media platforms. Oftentimes I'm Mayli, just Mayli. So if you hop onto those and follow me on the usual things, or you look up I have a pretty unique name, so I'm quite simple to find. Um, I will update how to find me over time on all the platforms. I also have a web page that's just a static web page that I update maybe once a year. That's just my full name.com. So it's MAYLIKHOE.com. Um, yeah, and I think those are the best ways to find me that I can give you right now.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining today. I love the Canadian connection and I love all that you shared. It's amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Have a great rest of your day.